Hello, I'm Alex McLaren. I'm an actor and I've worked as a communications coach since 2002. Now so much business is being conducted remotely, the ways in which we talk, present, build relationships and connect is changing. In this podcast, I want to explore all those issues and prove to you that no matter who you are, you can talk to anyone. Hello and welcome to You Can Talk to Anyone, the podcast where we open the bonnet on our communications engine. I'm Alex McLaren.
And I'm Tom Zielinski.
This week we wanted to talk about being on camera.
Something which happened very occasionally with most people. If you were running a business or you were some sort of subject matter expert, every so often, once or twice a year maybe, you might get called up and someone would say, can you appear on Newsnight? We're making a documentary about your specialist area. Can we send a camera crew round? But now, of course, being on camera is part of the way we just do business all of the time.
Yeah, and it's been a sudden shock. We've all been thrown into this cold water all at once, regardless of how old we were. Some of us have got experience being on camera professionally as performers. Do you remember the first time? Given that Tom and I both basically in our 40s. So when was the first time you saw yourself as a moving image?
Well, very early on. When I was very little, like 6 or 7, my uncle had a Super 8 movie camera,
right,
and I thought this was incredibly exciting. And so having seen some of his home movies, I then petitioned my parents to do likewise. Okay. And so there is 8mm movie footage of me, from the age of about 8.
And have you seen them recently?
I've certainly seen the footage of me aged about 11 or 12.
Get the 8-year-old. I mean, the reason I raise it is that I grew up in a house with no TV and therefore no video player. So when VHS cameras and tapes came in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't something really featured. I would see the school play videoed.
Right, yes.
Occasionally that would get circulated. So I'd see footage of this. Who's that weird person over in the distance? I guess that's the thing which is the reason I'm asking is that when you see footage of yourself, you're seeing something very, very strange, and it can make you incredibly self-conscious. All of you will know that weird feeling you have when you have to listen to your own voice when you record your answer phone message. You have to listen to it back to check that it's okay. And you hear your voice, and it can often freak you out because you're not familiar with that sound. But the awful truth is that everybody else is very familiar with it. You know, when Tom sees himself on camera and goes, "Oh my God, look at him," everyone else goes, "Yeah, it's just Tom."
Yeah.
And there's something very kind of vulnerable about that, about being the only person not in on the joke to a degree. And that can make appearing on camera really complicated. Of course, if you're going to be a spokesperson making a film, which is then going to be broadcast, there is also the added challenge that you have to do this well.
Yeah.
And you have a tremendous responsibility. It's not just simply capturing you. The training I've done with this when I've been working with people has been really interesting in that I think of it like a storyteller, and we want to see the effect of what's being talked about on the individual person. There's a relationship between the content and the person speaking. I was working with some chefs who were looking to move into television, and it's all very well to them to be brilliant at their chefy work and slicing a cucumber in 2 seconds flat on camera. But what really matters is when they taste what they've cooked, it looks to the viewer like they're really enjoying their lunch. And that's really important, that message gets to be sent down the camera. The business of being changed by what is happening is incredibly important in any storytelling camera work. And it needs to be subtle and it needs to be truthful, but it does need to happen. But I think that's also true when you are appearing on camera as yourself. You need to be flexible, you need to be open, you need to inhabit different emotional states as you're taking people through some kind of journey, some kind of narrative on camera.
And I think it's a very different situation if you're being interviewed. So someone says, we're making a documentary, can you talk about this? And they'll shoot hours of footage and pick a couple of bits here and there. But I think the hardest thing for someone who doesn't have any kind of acting training to do is to present, is to be, like the hero of the corporate video saying, this is the factory floor, or welcome to my world. And you will see sometimes, if you scroll through this kind of material, people who just seem to have forgotten how to human. They just don't take up space in a way which seems right. When they move, they look as if they're being marionetted by some incompetent puppeteer. And it's just everything you're talking about collapsing in on them, all of this self-consciousness, second guessing. How is it that someone sits on a chair like this, like this, like this, like this, and suddenly everything feels wrong? And that awkwardness can just blast through the screen. Then you watch someone who's been doing it for 20 years, and they make it look absolutely effortless.
And that is, I think, the key thing. We always say, I mean, even with our first improvisation classes, that the key to getting good at something is to have lots and lots of goes. And that's why people who've been doing it for so long make it seem easier, because they've discovered the ways to screw up, and they've paid attention, and they've rejected them, and opted for more successful strategies, and become more relaxed as a consequence. I do think that if you are new to appearing on camera, the simulation of a relationship between a speaker and a viewer watching this at home is incredibly difficult to do first time. You may find someone with an aptitude to it, in which case grab that person and grapple them to you with hoops of steel and make them go on camera. But I do think that interview element is so much easier, because what it does is it provides somebody with off-screen stimulus to bring about those realistic, meaningful changes, and to keep that interaction going. I think that this is important for any kind of sort of spontaneous interactive spokesperson work.
And very often, but I'm thinking particularly here of kind of talking head style documentaries, whether they're shot so that the interview subject is looking off to the side, or whether, as is sometimes the case, they're shot as if the interview subject is looking down the barrel of the lens. Very often, the interviewer is not featured at all. And very occasionally what you'll see in a documentary which is otherwise just talking heads responding to questions which we haven't heard is just in order to make sense of something, there will be this question that kind of floats in off mic.
Yes.
And in that moment you go, oh, all those people were answering questions.
Yes.
They weren't just expounding and pontificating and holding forth.
Yeah, that element of kind of looking straight down the lens, I think, is also very tricky. Of course, there's technology involved in a professional situation. Often there is a slanted screen with a reflection of text that people are trying to read.
Or sometimes you can actually set it up so that as the interview subject, you're looking at a piece of glass through which you can see the interviewer.
The face of the interviewer, yeah.
And then what's actually happening is what's being recorded is you just looking down the lens of the camera.
And that's magic for the camera, because what the camera captures is your actual response to an actual other human. And the tiny little changes that happen when two people are talking to each other are intricate, and they are incredibly complex. I've been saying to people recently in the shift back into face-to-face meetings and face-to-face work that the technology of my body and this person's body and the other person's body sitting in a room is just unbelievably well developed over millions of years.
Yes, incredibly sophisticated.
It is so sophisticated, and not, I think, in any rush to be superseded by robots, computers, and other kind of platforms.
This is the thing I find so fascinating. All of these video phone technologies have been around forever. Skype and Zoom, though no one had heard of it, and Apple FaceTime, and all of these things had existed for years.
A decade.
A decade or so. And they had never really been used.
Very
FaceTime
seldom.
a little bit for like showing elderly grandparents pictures of babies. But other than that, no, not really. A few big tech companies, I remember when I was working for a big tech company in San Francisco, they had conference rooms where one wall essentially was a big screen.
Yes.
And so there'd be 5 people around a conference table in real life and one person on the screen occupying that 6th seat.
Yes, we would occasionally have meetings with people in, Europe or San Francisco, and although the tech was probably pretty good, it was so ill understood about what the point of it was. So you'd end up with basically people sitting in the distance, far, far away from the camera, with a big white wall behind them. They'd just be a kind of a row of little silhouetted sort of Lego men, and they might as well not have been on camera at all.
So most of the time we tended to meet people face to face or talk to them on the phone. And everybody knew how those two things worked. And everybody was happy with one or other of those. And then suddenly we couldn't leave our homes. and we discovered this world of video conferencing.
We discovered two things. First, that Skype for Business was not long for this world. And secondly, that everybody could download these apps, and most laptops had a camera in them at the top, which was a huge boon. It wasn't simply our mobile phones that allowed us to do it.
So we've sort of got used to this now. Now plenty of conversations which pre-pandemic would have been face-to-face or on the phone have now become Zoom or Teams or Skype calls or whatever. And we've kind of got used to all of the drawbacks. We've got used to the fact that we don't get eye contact with anyone anymore. We've got used to the fact that when people talk over each other, sometimes the software will decide whose voice is heard and who is silenced. And we just kind of got, but I can't help thinking that the technology is going to have to take another jump forward at some point and try to give us back some of the things we've lost, because clearly we aren't going to go back to that world of either having audio-only phone calls or face-to-face meetings.
I remember a client of ours about 6 or 7 years ago, and they had this enormous video conferencing suite, which was basically a boardroom table with screens all the way around, like 360. So it was trying to ape as effectively as possible the idea of a group of people sitting around in a circle. And that was really interesting, because when we all now just do it on our screens, either at home or on our laptops, when you have a kind of a collection of faces laid out in front of you. That's very different from the big movements I have to make round a table in order to make eye contact with the person on my left, person on my right, person over there. And that so that technology was, I guess, hugely invested in and has now been totally ditched. So what of this is going to survive? And I'm always, I mean, you say that we've got used to the lack of eye contact. I think we've become habituated to it, but I still think it's actually causing quite a lot of problems. It doesn't give you that feeling of, I'm getting to know this person, because so much of that feeling of being seen comes from them literally looking into my eyes.
So one of the things I end up doing, which I assume is something that you'd endorse, is just turn the volume up a little bit on how reactive and expressive I am.
Absolutely.
I can't get that genuine connection, but what I can do is just a tiny little bit of exaggeration. So if somebody makes a joke, just be a bit more responsive, a bit more animated than I would be if we were in real life.
Yeah, what you listeners can't see is that Tom's hands have got involved in a big way.
Yes.
And absolutely. I mean, one point which I'm also always making to people who have to work from home or are working on some kind of video conference is pop your elbows on the table, because it means that your hands are more likely to be seen and they're more likely to be doing some communicating work. And it's striking if you look at professional presenters who have been doing this for years. They just have that question. Ask next time you see John Simpson, okay, or next time you see Emily Maitlis, ask yourself, what's she doing with her hands? And you'll notice she doesn't seem to be thinking about it at all. But they're both actually they're physically committed to what they're trying to say to you.
William Hartnell, the first actor to play Doctor Who, had this theory that the television was all about the face, which is a pretty good one, and there were lots of close-ups. So he got into the habit, playing the part of clutching his waistcoat lapels.
Yes,
which meant
see that straight away in my mind's eye.
His hands were very near his face, and then if he did do something expressive, they would be certain to be caught in that very tight close-up.
Yeah, well, he was a smart guy and a brilliant actor. One other thing which strikes me when you say that is that when we are together face-to-face, not on camera, tiny little signals are very, very clear. Implicit signals keep the ball aloft as it bounces along in the conversation. Whereas I think on cameras, particularly as the images are often shrunk on a computer screen when we're doing video work, we need to make our implicit signals slightly more explicit. So it does, as you say, turning the volume up is a good way of putting it. And it can feel, I think, when you first do it, oh God, this is slightly cheesy, or am I overacting? Very, very rarely would I say it seems that way to the people at the other end. And in fact, it's providing people with the encouragement, I think, that people need at the other end of the camera relationship, because God knows it makes such a huge difference when you feel you're getting any kind of feedback, like a nod or a smile or people wanting to engage with you.
So do you think it's going to kind of habituate people more to being on camera, being on a TV or part of a filmed documentary, something which is going to happen to most people very rarely in their lives, if at all? But suddenly we've all got used to being on camera and seeing our own image staring back at us.
Oh, not only that, people can simply make their own to-camera documentaries. I mean, I have a 12-year-old son, and he is really interested in YouTubers who aren't just playing computer games. They're sticking cameras in their own faces and throwing it in the top right corner so that you can see. And I think this is maybe something that's really important. The relationship between the game that's being played and the person who is playing it, how they're affected by the events that are happening. So you don't just see their choices within the game, you see the look on their face when 3 new aliens come around the corner and they need to shoot them. And I think that relationship is, I think, at the heart of any effective communication. I think, not just thinking about particular conversations, particular transactions, it's that very long relationship. Sometimes it's about what people say to each other, the stories they tell, the way they listen. Sometimes it's about the presents they send each other, or the emails they send each other, or the fact that they keep the promises they're making in commercial relationships. I'll get back to you by Friday. There it is on Thursday night, So there's, and I think that if that element actually is at the heart of working on camera as well, how can you generate a relationship between the person speaking and not the camera, but the person who's on the other end of the camera, who is the viewer sitting on their sofa at home or sitting at a swivel chair in their office. I think what's really interesting about professional television presenters, and they've been doing it for 60, 70, 80 years, is that they make us feel like they know us. Okay, so if you're Adrian Giles and Christine, what's her name, Bleakley, sitting on the One Show, looking at a camera, Christine will be talking and Adrian will be looking at her, interested in what she has to say, and then he'll look at the camera because he's interested in how what she said affects you, and
which you can never know.
Which you'll never know. But he's interested in you. In oh yeah, what do you think of this? And then he looks back at her to see what she thinks of the feedback she was getting from people on the sofa, which he hasn't seen, which he hasn't heard. He's watching the conversation, and then he knows it's his bit, so he starts talking to the camera, and she will do the same thing, basically creating in a person at the other end the feeling that they are welcome in the conversation, even if all they're doing is watching and listening. That's the reason for 2 things in the work I'm doing with people when they're looking at the way they communicate, the conversations that they have when they're on a video conference. Number 1 is, I think it is a very good idea to get familiar with pretending that the camera is a person and looking at it. Even if the person you're talking to is now in the sort of the bottom left of your peripheral vision on your screen, that's where their face is projected. I think it can help to just every now and then, at least, or a bit more often than feels instinctive, look at the camera and pretend it's them. And in fact, I haven't brought them to the office. I've got a set of googly eyes, which I stick on either side of people's cameras when they're struggling with this, because it can sometimes help to have a face to look at to favour.
That's great. That's a great trick.
But I'd also say that's not necessarily the whole thing, because if I'm making a TV broadcast from home, I do have to pretend that the millions of viewers are visible to me. But on a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams calls, I don't. They are visible to me very often, particularly if they've followed my cheerful instruction to turn their bloody cameras on at the beginning of the call, which, again, assertively but positively, make sure that people do that. Because I can see them and I can see feedback that they want to offer. And so I'd say, particularly in the one-on-one being on camera interactions, I'd say also pay attention to their feedback, because they can see that even though you're not looking at the camera, they're not getting eye contact, so to speak, from you on camera. They can see that what you're offering is paying attention to the feedback that they are giving you. And so it's almost like we're both looking in a mirror and having that conversation back and forth, and we're seeing each other's kind of reflection around the corner, that sideways on look you sometimes get when you're in a particular, in a tailor's showroom.
Similarly, when somebody sticks a microphone in your face and says, well, whatever you say next is going to be recorded, it does change the dynamic a little bit.
It does. This is, in these conversations we're having, this is a subject that I'm thinking about all the time as a professional, and it matters to me. So I feel like I'm in my field of expertise. So I don't feel quite so sort of self-conscious as I would be normally. But there is also a sense that this isn't going out live. I can speak. We can talk about, can we snip here? Can we snip there?
Have you done live TV or live radio?
Only as an interviewee, usually talking about community charity projects in Folkestone, where I live. So I guess the stakes haven't felt tremendously high for me personally. Okay, although I suppose I've been the spokesperson for the organisation. That's been on radio, local radio, and also actually occasionally I've done sort of Facebook Live launch events, and that's very much kind of like you're a one-man camera studio. If you ever, listeners, you should definitely try this, because it's a very close simulation of what it's like being a TV presenter, but without a huge crew around you.
Yeah, you're the crew.
You set the whole thing up, and you can see the numbers of people that are logging on. Oh, I've got an audience of 45 people, and then you can call out for feedback, and people can send you smiley faces. So if you're feeling totally lonely when you're broadcasting it, but that feedback element I think is really important. So if you find yourself doing any of those things alone, make sure that you explicitly request people to wave and smile and send messages back to you, because the encouragement and the relationship is what is going to make the message authentic and positive and practically useful for whatever reason you're sending it out.
And this does bring us back to what's been a big theme of these podcasts, which is I've got a message I want to communicate, and I want to do that as authentically as possible. But in order to achieve that aim, I may have to take a step back and think, what version of myself am I going to put on show right now? How do I want people to receive this? What behaviors can I adopt which are going to genuinely reflect what I think about this, but are going to be effective in transmitting that through this medium?
How interesting. You're right. And in fact, something's just occurred to me, which I think is somewhat different between the world we were used to, i.e. only a handful of people would appear on camera talking about sort of whatever matter it was, and now everybody's doing it because we're all doing it from home.
It's become democratized.
Yeah, it is that there was a huge amount of trouble taken in the way people would present themselves. They would, like, have you ever put makeup on, Tom, for an appearance on camera?
Once or twice.
Yeah.
But not lately.
But not yourself at home.
No.
Right? This is it. So basically, it comes in the professional world in which there has been a culture of everybody is dressed right, and somebody else is making sure you look right. There's kind of all the continuity that happens on a film set or in a studio. Your hair is like they're just adjusting it to make sure it looks just like the last shot. There's a huge amount of trouble taken to maintain a particular consistency, and of course that's kind of gone. I mean, the beards and the pajama tops that people would wear, particularly during the quarantine period in 2020, and some of that relaxation is still there as a kind of legacy of that period.
But there was an emphasis, particularly with kind of the YouTubers and the streamers, in lighting and sort of set design, making sure that you had something interesting in your background, but also that you could be clearly seen. And we all remember the first few months of the pandemic when we were interacting with people looking up their noses or with them in front of windows. So again, they had just become silhouettes. And you see that much less these days. It hasn't gone away. There's still some people who've not quite either got the hang of that or just it's never occurred to them that, yes, you need to be your own lighting designer, your own camera operator, your own set designer. And those things do make a difference.
Yes, they do. I've noticed that one of the new options that MS Teams is offering people, if you've not tried this, is different presentation modes than the screen share clunkiness, which we've all got very used to, but which is definitely suboptimal. And they offer something called journalist mode, which basically pops your green screened head and shoulders against a sort of virtual television studio with a screen with your slides in the background. So it's trying to simulate that kind of the professional feel that we get when we watch the news at 10 or sort of journalism circumstances. And it doesn't surprise me that we're trying to map onto something that we're familiar with and trust, at least in terms of the professionalism with which they're speaking, even if we don't necessarily agree with all the messages. If you have any experiences about appearing on camera that you'd like us to tackle, please get in touch with us. I'm on alex@the-spontaneity-shop.com.
And I'm Tom at the-spontaneity-shop.com, or I'm at Tom Selinsky on Twitter.
We do face-to-face training, but we also do work on camera, and many organisations are still very much struggling with this and want help with it. So please get in touch, and we can do a day of one-on-one coaching sessions with individuals, and we also do group sessions teaching people how to facilitate with a camera in using video conferencing technologies, and we'd love to tackle any challenges you throw our way. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Goodbye for now.
You have been listening to You Can Talk to Anyone with Alex McLaren and Tom Selinsky. The producer for The Spontaneity Shop was Tom Selinsky. You Can Talk to Anyone is distributed exclusively by Acast.